Yeah.
Are you guys can you see people coming?
Yeah. Excellent. More there. Can you pull up the notes, please? Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. I can see people are joining the session. Sorry, we'll just wait a few more seconds for people to join before we proceed. Yeah, just it's only 19, just gonna wait a few. Okay. So welcome everyone to the Tyler Wren webinar on building resilient teams and implementing change now. My name is Simone Story and I'm here today with my colleague Kirsty Ballett from Tyler Wren. So welcome. We are recruitment specialists who work in the design and build engineering market in New Zealand. And we are also joined today by our lovely speaker, Mirjam Oord, who is the Director of People and Capability at SolarCity. Mirjam holds a 20-year career within business transformation and has been instrumental in developing and implementing change management strategies within key businesses across New Zealand. So today she will be taking about 20 or so minutes to discuss her practical experience in change management and how firms can be best placed to implement these strategies. So before we start, just a wee bit of housekeeping. Today's session is being recorded for those who registered and for those who are also unable to attend. There will also be a Q&A session at the end where you'll get an opportunity to ask Mirjam any questions you might have. You'll be able to submit your questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So without much further ado, over to you, Mirjam.
Thank you very much, Simone and Kirsty. Lovely to see everyone today. And when I was approached by the two of them to share some of my experience and SolarCity's experience over the last 3 months, I jumped at the chance. And I guess it's because having worked in the transformation space for a number of years, I guess a part of it is around, I've always said to people, swim with the tide. Right? So when you're looking at change, the hardest time to change things is when you feel you're fighting against the tide. So at the moment, from a resilience point of view, at the moment, from a change point of view, as hard as this economic environment is, as hard as COVID has been for people on a personal level, it is also a time where we can actually look at resilience and look at transformation and look at how we work. And we're actually working with the tide. So everybody has had to change. Everybody is slightly out of their comfort zone, which is actually the time from a learning point of view, which is the most engaging. So I guess for me, I just wanted to share through SolarCity's story and just some of our practical tips. And I'll give you a bit of context about SolarCity. And there's going to be some warts and all in here because we're certainly not perfect. And it's just sharing what we have done, where we've seen some real gains, and where we're seeing that actually really help us around well-being, around resilience, around our employment brand, and around essentially the psychological safety of our people. So it's kind of saying now's the time, swim with the tide. It's never been a better time to change, as hard as it sometimes can feel. So this is sort of SolarCity's story. So first of all, SolarCity, you might not have heard of us before. So we're a small medium business, a New Zealand business, and we are in the business of energy. And so what we do is we essentially look at your property, and we have solar panels and batteries that we put on people's property. And then we essentially help manage and reduce energy prices for our customers. And also we use that energy and buy it, sell it on the wholesale markets to make sure customers get a lower price. So that's us, but I'm not into selling SolarCity, except that it's a pretty awesome place to be. It's more kind of going around our change journey. So it starts, unfortunately, not for us in the best place, which is around our engagement. So we've been fortunate that we're a company, we have 120 people based in Auckland, Christchurch, and Nelson, and we are really passionate about what we do. Right, so being carbon neutral company, making a positive change to Kiwis' we're super engaged about that. That's been fantastic. What we haven't always been so good at is how we work, right? So like a lot of companies, we've gone from being a startup to kind of what they call scale up stage. And I talk about us being like a teenager. So the clothes we wore when we were a startup don't really fit anymore. And the clothes we need now are not the clothes that we're going to need in a couple of years' time when we've actually got some of the scale that we're driving. So that's been a key part where actually it's been quite hard and really hard for our people. So the first thing we did is we looked at and we said, well, we need some way to talk about our culture. Right? So because without that, it becomes a lot of sort of anecdotal conversation. So I'm just going to share a couple of slides of what we used to start talking about our culture. So let's reduce that. You can see my screen. Okay, so just check you can see this. So what we used in this case, and there's lots of different drivers, is we've actually used Gallup's international levers of positive culture. So these are us sort of going, right, what is 10 levers that we think would make a difference, right, to our people? So we've got mission and purpose, ethics and compliance, diversity and inclusion, leadership, inspiration. I won't read them all out, you guys can see them there, but this was us starting to be able to have a way to talk about as a senior leadership team, what are the drivers for a positive culture for us. And now comes the warts and all part, which is actually, how did we actually score back in November? And let me just pull it up. Here is our results. So this is out of 10 as a scale. So just to give you an idea, if it's over about 8.5, it's pretty good. Everything underneath that, we definitely needed to work on. So you can see that for us, our mission and purpose came through as our strongest. That was our guiding light, right? That's something we all actually had that we could build on. And then some of the others around how we worked started getting pretty low in the scores. So you can see leadership, trust, disruption, well-being. Some of these were not, this was a hard pill to swallow when you saw this. But what we used it for was when we then looked into this change environment, what it's helped is sometimes you can feel really overwhelmed when you see something like this, right? It's actually, as I said, it's a hard pill to swallow. But then it helped us kind of begin to prioritize where did we want to make change. And then looking at the climate. So in this climate right now, what really matters for employees, right, is that they can trust their leadership, that we've got confident ways to manage disruption going forward, and that we're looking after each other. So what we did is we said, let's prioritize those 3 drivers. And that's what we've been focused on for this building resilience and this transformation over these last couple of months. So we just went, okay, the others we can improve on by all accounts, but let's focus on 3 that we think we can make a difference. And those are the ones that we think we can work with the tide on. So that was around those. The other piece we needed to do, which really helped us, was we needed a language to talk about resilience, right? Because if I ask you, what do you think resilience means? And I ask somebody else, we'd all probably have a different way of talking about it. So it's not about that there's one right or one right way to talk about it. We just found one that we could use. And in this case, we used the resilience spiral from the Resilience Institute, which is a Kiwi business, and they're based in the North Shore, and Dr. Sven Hansen heads that up. What we did when we talked about this, you can see it's a spiral, and we talked about it like a swing ball set. You know, when you're playing swing ball, and essentially it's saying that you move through these spirals and they change at every given day or even any given hour. But we used it as a way when we did our pulse surveys to check where people were at. It was a really good tool to also help managers work with their people. So we found this worked really well for us. It also helped us, when you look down the bottom of the spiral, there are people who are really struggling at the moment, who are feeling vulnerable, distressed, and depressed. And it helped us kind of, when we identify that, go, hey, we might not be the right people to help, but we have systems in place to help them. And the ones that we use EAP services, Mental Health Foundation, they have a fantastic free resource that they've put out at the moment. So we kind of use this as a way to find a language that we could talk about resilience. And it really just helped all of us be able to kind of develop further. The other piece when we started looking at it is we really try to focus on, when we're going to make change, what is our why? Why do we want to do it? So we used what's called principles-based decision making. So these were our principles around when we wanted to look at change, right? We said we want to open our offices in a way that is safe, limit the number of people, continue the communications that we'd built up over COVID, because I don't know about others, but we actually found that our communication, because we had to, got way better than it used to, because I think we assumed when we just saw each other in the office that by osmosis people seem to have, kind of picked up things from each other. Allowing the flexibility in our working days, and probably the most important principle was this last one, which was that it was a trial and that things can change. And I think by us acknowledging from the start that we didn't know the answers, that we were going to try something new and we were doing it together, actually resonated really, really well. And I guess my tip here is that if you're going to make the changes, make sure it passes what they call the sniff test, right? So, I mean, we've got a company of really smart, talented people. If we try to make change and it doesn't hold up on our why, all the questions about the how gets really, really difficult really quickly, right? Because they can smell it a mile away if it doesn't have a genuine intent. But what I could use was our results here, and I said, remember, we wanted to improve, so therefore these are the changes we want to make. So making that connection worked really well for us. I'm just going to stop sharing for a second. So those were some of the key tips that we had, and it has worked really well for us. I will show you at the end some of the results, and the other two key pieces when I asked some others in the team around what do they think has really worked for us at the moment. So one was the fact that we got personal, right? And I think for me, having worked sometimes in some really large companies, what was really encouraging working in a company the size of ours was you could get your hands, your head, and your heart around everybody. And at the moment, well-being and people's personal safety is more important than ever. So the ability to be able to do that and to give our managers tools like that resilient spiral to actually help them do that with their people was really key. This is, again, talking about working with the tide. When I started working in the space 10, 15 years ago, right, people would talk about, oh, I've got my head around something, right? We just talked about it in a very one-dimensional view. Have you got your head around it? I've got my head around it. It's going to work, right? Then we kind of had the people who are practical, right? So they're like, oh, yeah, you got your hands in, you've got, rolled up your sleeves, you got stuck in. And we still weren't talking about this third aspect, which is, have you got your heart around it? And so this is around, I think, is a really great opportunity for us, right? Because the conversations are there. They're not just happening us trying to push something. It's happening in the Herald every day. We've got, it's happening in, as I talked about the researchers and response and resources coming out of Mental Health Foundation. Every time we look on LinkedIn, right, the articles are about our employees, around how we build and look after them, around what can we do to keep them psychologically safe. So working with the tide and working with that has actually really given us strong results. And then the last one, I guess, is around keeping it real. So what we found was actually, basically we did twice a week, we did stand-ups, and they were only 15 minutes, company stand-ups, and it was the CEO sitting on a chair, or myself or someone else, talking about what was going on. And there were no slides, and it was just really real what was happening. We talked about the challenges we had around making sure we got the wage subsidy. We talked about why we were proud that we actually applied and we got it. We talked about the challenges we had to make sure we brought everybody through, and that really improved that driver around leadership trust. So when we were able to have hard conversations, people knew where it had come from, and people understood the trade-offs and the challenges that we had. And then finally, I guess the key piece is around we're really open that we don't know what we're doing is going to be perfect or that it's going to work in the future, but it's working for us now. So what I thought I would do just to finish is actually just show us, we've done a survey again on those key drivers with our staff to actually see, well, how is this working? Sounds great, Mirjam, but actually, have you seen a difference? So I'll just show you through some of the results. Okay. So, right, so here we go. So that, as I said, so some of our results. These were the key drivers that we were working through. So leadership trust, keeping it real, having those regular conversations. To be honest, taking away a lot of the slides and a lot of the other parts of it actually built our leadership trust. Giving our managers a way to talk about resilience and giving them good feedback that they could then have strong, good conversations with their staff to support them, built their leadership trust, right? Because it's not just about one person, great, we've got a fantastic, strong CEO, but it's also about building that leadership trust of all of our leadership team. So you can see that one jumped up from 7.2 up to 8.7 out of 10. So that is a huge increase. The second one, really proud of, which is around us being able to manage disruption. This was our lowest score. So back in November, essentially the confidence our employees had on how we could manage change was really low. That has now gone up to 8.6, right? So this is us. So this is confident that we're going to be able to ride out the future and that we actually have got, sort of the right skill set and the right systems in place to manage disruption going forward. And then the third one is around our staff and well-being. So by putting these things in place, we've actually jumped this one, which was our second lowest, up through to 8.5, and we're really proud of that. So that's essentially in terms of some of the key results. What that has meant is that now our staff, rather than basically saying what we do is great, but actually working here is pretty hard, they're now recommending us to their friends, right? So they're actually talking to people about how we have managed our staff through this period, and they're proud of it, and they're telling others. So that means that in terms of the likelihood to recommend to other people has actually increased significantly. So yeah, here's just what I share a little bit. This is kind of what our space looks like now. We made quite a lot of changes in our physical space as well. So if you look in the top right, that there is our CEO busy getting his hands dirty and putting a lot of desks together. You can see us in the middle there, that's some of the Auckland team. We've got a flexible working as part of our changes. That's working really well for us as we adapt. We've got new different spaces, and yeah, it's working for us at the moment. So that's kind of us sort of sharing our story. I would love to hear questions. I'd also like to hear what other people are doing. Are people also seeing the benefits and the gains of investing and putting the time and energy into this space? We certainly are, and yeah, it's exciting. In that respect, I think it is really exciting. So Kirsty, Simone, that's kind of a summary.
Yeah, thank you, Mirjam. Those are some really amazing gains that you made there in those three results. So really interesting data. Thank you. So we've had a couple of questions come through, Mirjam. So the first one is, how did you improve your disruption score? What did you implement?
Good question. First of all, I'll tell you quite quickly what we weren't doing very well beforehand, and then it makes it quite easy what we did to improve it. So the reason we scored really low on disruption on that November was the key reason was around communication. So people found that when we were trying to adapt to things, and we're in an innovative space, right? So that happens all the time, that when we didn't communicate well what was expected of people. We didn't clarify the process particularly well, and so therefore people felt like they were kind of trying to do the best they could, but they didn't have the right tools. So that's what we weren't doing so well before. So therefore, what did we do to improve the score? The key one was around that communication. So setting up that cadence, right, where we had those stand-ups, where we were sort of talking through key pieces, made a big difference because we really kept talking through the principles and why we were doing things. From a process point of view, we were actually pretty rigid, particularly around supporting our staff. So in the past, we would have said, hey, are all your staff all right? Is people okay? And they would have gone, yeah, sure, I think so. Well, this time we said, actually, we want all of us to have spoken personally to the people in your team within the week and tell us how they're doing. And that made a really big difference. So that was actually kind of really making sure that the communication part of it worked well and the process was more robust. And then the third one was about giving people the space to give the feedback back. So in the past, we might have had that in frustrations and people didn't know where to go with those. Now we've got more of a culture where people can actually, if something isn't working, that they can come back to us and go, hey, I don't think this is working. And because we've set up from a disruption point of view, more like a trial and test environment, people feel more comfortable giving it a try. And if it doesn't work, they can see that we're making improvements.
Yeah. And was that a fully anonymous process?
It was interesting. It was about building that trust. Remember, leadership trust was one of our key drivers. So when we did our first sort of surveys and feedbacks, it was all anonymous because people didn't trust us. And as we built the trust, when we started, we changed it from things being anonymous to being confidential. You can't do that if you don't have the trust in the first place. So no, we had to start getting feedback anonymously until people saw that we were respecting the data and that we were using it, right? Because if you didn't, you would never get to the point where you could give confidential data. No, we've now got to a point where actually people are acknowledged, we know who they are because they trust that we're using it confidential, in a confidential way. Yeah. And that means that we can then improve how we support people because they know that if they are saying on that resilient spiral that they're sitting at the bottom, that someone's going to check on them and they're going to be okay.
Okay, great. Our next question is around employer branding. So what are the top things employers can be doing right now to enhance their employment brand, even if they're not hiring?
Yeah, great question. I can tell you some of the things that are working for us at the moment from employer brand. So one is around the work we've done for our employees that has built our internal employee likelihood to recommend, right? So what that means is we've got 120 people who are busy now telling others about what a great job SolarCity is doing and looking after their staff. You can't buy that. That just comes from the effort that has come through. So that's a key part, is around when you're looking after your staff well, that actually just starts happening organically. But there is also something that we've noticed on LinkedIn that's been working really well for us from an employee brand point of view. And that's the posts around people. Right, so I showed you a photo before which had Neil and somebody else, Kumaran, busy putting a desk together. Putting those photos, and we talked about it very low key. It was around, hey, this is what transformation looks like. It's hard graft. It's teams coming together on a Saturday and making something happen. That, from an employee brand point of view, those got so much more traction in the market because it's real. Right, and there's no gloss around it. So what we're finding is that the photos and the stories about our people that are in those principles, keeping it real, genuine, those are really working for us. So that's certainly something we're using from an employee brand point of view to actually help our story.
Yeah, sure. And at the start of the process in November, when you started that culture driver assessment, if engagement was low, how did you get people bought into the process?
Good question. They probably weren't that much. So although the return rate on the survey and things like that was okay, it was definitely quite a cautious culture. So it was, I think, for a lot of people, they kind of went, well, I'll give you what I've got now. It's anonymous. It's okay. But there was certainly sort of reticence because people they didn't have the confidence that we were going to do anything with it.
Yeah.
But what it did, talking about that transparency and leadership trust, I stood in front of everybody when we did our company update and shared all those results. And I was really honest about it. I said, look, this is actually, this is hard to read. And what you're telling us is that we're tired. We've got to improve how we work. What we do is great, but how we're working is actually really wearing us down. And I think by being genuine about that and actually recognizing it, so not hiding it, right? Not trying to say, oh, look at these great things over here, and we won't talk about these bits here. By actually acknowledging that actually helped along the way. And then reinforcing all the time as we go through why we do something, because you've given us the license to change. You've told us this wasn't working. So don't know if what we're going to do now is going to be any better, but at least we're going to try and do something different.
Yeah, sure. And what would you say are the drivers around people leaving firms, Mirjam?
That's an interesting one around leaving. I would certainly say from our experience is that not to take for granted that the employment market at the moment, people aren't leaving because people aren't sure about what else is happening, not to take that for granted for a second, because essentially if you are doing that, then as soon as something changes, those people are going to go really quickly. And the other thing, what we're finding is that we talk about bouncing forward, not bouncing back. So there was quite a lot of rhetoric about, hey, companies, you can bounce back. And we actually said we can't anymore, because what our employees thought was okay in March, they don't think is okay now, right? Because remember, that tide is moving. So if you're going back to, and all you're doing is putting all your effort into going back to how things were, it's not actually what people want anymore. So if we hadn't responded to some of the, some of the sentiment around flexible working, actually what it would have done is it would have put us backwards. So my advice is that keep investing in our people, because yes, at the moment they might not be going anywhere else because they might not have any other options, but that should not be an opportunity for us to rest on our laurels. And what I'm finding is that actually by investing in our employees and our resilience and well-being, we're actually getting that loyalty. If you think about from a memory point of view, we're going to remember this time. We're going to remember in 5-10 years time, and we look back and we're having a glass of wine with friends, and we're going to go, oh my gosh, can you remember this time? They're going to remember this time, and they're going to remember how they were treated through this period. And we don't get that chance again. So it doesn't mean if you haven't up until now that you can't do something now. We're still in that period. So I think that's probably a key piece.
Yeah. And last question, Mirjam, are there any tangible financial gains for a firm who engages on such a personal level with their staff like this? And do you see anything tangible that you have noted?
So tangible financial gains, certainly in terms of productivity is a key one. So when in times like this, when we're all in quite a disruptive market, and we've actually seen huge increases in sales and things like that, which is fantastic. We're asking people to go the extra mile. You don't get that if you don't feel like you're going to be looked after. And I'm not talking about financially, I'm talking about that we're looking after our people. So we're seeing that. We're having to ask some people to pull out all the stops at the moment. And we're doing that. So we make no excuses for our high expectations of performance, but you don't get that if you aren't looking after people. So that's probably, it is one. Second one, certainly around retention, right? So yeah, our turnover rate has significantly reduced, not just since we've been in lockdown, but it was already beginning to reduce in January, February, March. That has a huge financial cost for us if we can retain our great staff. We go to so much effort and energy to bring the right people on. We've got these great talented people, and when as a SME, if we lose one and we have to bring somebody else on, that actually impacts us significantly, not just the financial in terms of, but also the onboarding, the loss of knowledge. So that's been a real key one for us as well. So yeah, we've actually seen our turnover rate reduced by over 15%. So,
excellent. That's fantastic, Mirjam. I think we are all out with the questions now, unless anyone wants to put one through at the last minute. Otherwise, we'll be probably...
Oh, can we ask a question? Is anyone else, I'd be interested in what others are doing. I'd love to hear if someone else has got something they would like to share. I know it's a bit hard, they probably weren't expecting.
Let's keep an eye on Q&A, Mirjam, and see what comes through.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess a good one to note would be whether this is something that HR needs to drive, because sometimes not all firms we work with and have HR managers or HR representatives in the business. So how would a business where it's owner run or director run, how would they go about making this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And in short, you don't need an HR department to run it. If I go back through in terms of, first of all, was around what are your drivers of a good culture, right? That's a conversation that you can have with your team, with your leadership team, and kind of figuring those out. That's not anyone's, that certainly isn't a license or something that's only held in the knowledge domain of, people in the HR space or people space. So having that conversation, anybody can have, right? What are the things, and I always talk about it, I'll be asking the question to my leadership team, I'd say, what are the things that when you can see when our culture is working well, right? So it might say people are comfortable talking with each other, we get good pushback if somebody doesn't agree with something, whatever it might be. Those are your levers of a positive culture. And then that second part around the conversation around resilience, that's essentially I use that tool from the Resilience Institute from Dr. Sven, but that's also just about having a conversation with your staff. Particularly for the smaller companies, I think it is the biggest opportunity, because you can get your hands and your heart around every single person in that company, and it's a competitive advantage. I actually think at the moment in this climate, I think it's a huge competitive advantage that we could be leveraging across New Zealand. Because some of the larger companies, everything has to be at scale. So some people feel like they're a number in a very big organisation right now. Right, so the advantage some of these smaller companies have is that there's nothing stopping us picking up that phone and having that conversation that says, are you okay? And to be honest, it's more valued from employees than ever before.
And people remember those things too.
Yeah.
I even think about my own career and where I've been approached by different senior members of companies and just come and stop and chat at my desk. And you think, oh, and they just want to talk to you, just as person to person.
Exactly. And I think that was probably one of the key things, was actually, it was quite interesting. If you'd asked me, did I know our people, or as a leadership team, did we know all our people before COVID? I would have said, yes, of course I do. I know all their names. But that actually, what I realized was once we started going through this process was actually what we didn't know about each other. And I've got a mountain biking poster behind me on the wall, right? So suddenly people were like, hey, I didn't know you really enjoyed mountain biking. It was those kind of pieces, and then that has enabled us to build a stronger, more personal relationship.
Excellent.
Cool.
Great. I think that's it then from the questions.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mirjam. It's been excellent to hear your very real expectations of how people management works and what the outcomes have been for you. I think it's excellent.
Yeah, you're welcome. And in terms of for your wider network, what we've talked about today, I'm happy to share, right? I'm passionate about New Zealand. I'm passionate about us growing, particularly the SME market and our talent. If people are looking for, maybe a little bit more of a conversation around some of these things, I'd be more than happy to reach out and help, because I don't think this is something that, this is a competitive advantage I think we could all make the most of. So,
excellent.
And hey, we've got all these Kiwis coming back home, right? The brain gain, how are we making the most of that? Can that maybe be the next conversation?
Yeah, definitely.
And as I mentioned to everyone earlier on, this has been recorded and will be available. We'll be sending it out to everybody, including those who have been unable to attend today, along with Mirjam's slides. She's kindly offered to send those out with the webinar as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me have a chance to share SolarCity's story.
Yeah, have a good day, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Bye.
Thank you.